and we're glad to have you all here for our Safe Sleep Child Welfare Practice and Safe Sleep webinar. We've got a great group of you here this morning. We have 174 of you online at the moment, so we're glad that you're all here and looking forward to talking about this topic. All right, so as with all of our webinars, this was developed through funding from the North Carolina Division of Social Services, and we developed that in partnership, we here at the Family and Children's Resource Program. We are part of the Jordan Institute for Families at the UNC Chapel Hill School of Social Work. In case you have colleagues who are not able to attend this morning, we will be offering a recording of this webinar soon on NCSW Learn, and we'll let you know when that is available. And also, if it's something that you want to listen to again or share with other people, that recording will be up in our archives in an ongoing way once we get it up there. So we'll send out information letting you know that the webinar recording is available. All right, so the goals for this webinar is that we want to define safe and unsafe sleep for infants and describe some recent North Carolina data on sleep-related child deaths. We want to do that so that we can identify steps for improving the assessment of risk of sleep-related child deaths, and we want you to be able to communicate clearly to parents and others the risks of unsafe sleep and how to protect children against sleep-related fatalities. I can see that many of you have already found our chat pod and you are talking to us and saying good morning, and we're glad you're all here. And a lot of you enjoyed the music, which was great and very summery. I feel like it's getting us all ready to enter into summer. You may chat with us individually or as hosts if you need to. There's a drop-down menu on the very upper right-hand side of the chat pod that will allow you to chat with the hosts or with Philip. You can put your, Philip is going to be assisting us, so you can just let us know if you need help with any technical issues, and you can type your questions into the chat pod. And I'm going to talk in a second about how we're going to handle questions this morning. So, because we have a large number of folks on the line, we do want to have a chance to answer your questions as much as possible. So we would like you to type them into the chat pod as you think of them. We will not be answering them in the moment that you type them, but we want you to know that we're not ignoring them. So we will be keeping track of those questions throughout the webinar, and we will pause a couple different times to try to answer some of the most commonly asked questions. And then there will be a follow-up document that will answer any questions that we did not get to, and we'll also have written answers to the ones we did get to, and that document gets emailed out to anyone who is registered for this webinar. And it will be also posted once we post the webinar recording. So please don't feel that we're ignoring your questions. Just know that we're keeping track of them. We do want you to ask them, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible this morning. You can also use the icons to get attention. It let us know if it's too quiet or you're not hearing anything or you need us to speed up or slow down. We always appreciate laughter and applause, so please go ahead and use those icons if you need to get our attention in a different way. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. So I'm the moderator this morning. My name is Laura Phipps. I am a clinical assistant professor here at the Family and Children's Resource Program at UNC Chapel Hill, and I also train out in the field and online. So hopefully some of you are familiar with me and have had some training experiences, so welcome. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to go ahead and start with
Hey, good morning. My name is Jessica Guice-Albritton, and I am a policy consultant with the Division of Social Services Child Welfare Section.
Oh, Molly, are you muted?
I am, thank you. Good morning, I'm Molly Berkoff. I'm a pediatrician with the UNC School of Medicine as well as Wake County Human Services.
Good morning, I am Tonya Mourning. I'm a program consultant and trainer with the Division of Social Services Staff Development Unit.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. We have a wonderful panel this morning with lots of different experience and knowledge, so I think you're going to really enjoy the content we have for you today. We also have online two other folks who are going to be here to assist you. So Philip Armfeld is doing our technical assistance, and I can see that he has already chatted with a few of you. So if you have technical questions, please chat in the chat pod to Philip, and he will do his best to assist you. We also have John McMahon on the line, and John is going to be in the background keeping track of our questions and letting us know which questions are asked most frequently so that we can answer them during this session. John will also be creating the follow-up document and sending that out to everyone once that's completed. All right, before we get started, I want to remind all of you that there are handouts with this webinar, and because they were not sent out in advance, so if you do not have them in front of you, we encourage you to download them now. There is a file share pod directly below our photographs. You just click on the handout, and then you click on download file. All right, so before we pass this over to the panel, we just want to talk a little bit about the topic of sleep in general. It can be and often is a very touchy, challenging subject to bring up with particularly new parents who have a young infant in their home, because everyone wants to get as much sleep as possible, and it is challenging to do that when you have a young infant in your house, and so it can feel scary to talk about changing anything that might feel like it's working for you. So a couple things to think about. For many families, co-sleeping is a normal and natural part of what they do, and can seem that there's nothing wrong with it. And the reason for that is because, as I said, many parents are very, very tired and they just want to get sleep. And if the child falls asleep, you don't want to move them, you don't want to do anything that's going to wake them up, so you're going to stay where you are. The other reason can be that we have a lot of families living with other families, or having shared living quarters or shared beds, and that can make co-sleeping seem like something that you want to do. Also, it's about culture, and that can be culture within a family, an ethnicity, or a group, that sort of family dynamic, that this is what we've always done. There's schools of thought, so there's cultures around attachment parenting that really believe that bed sharing is a way to best support healthy development for your child. So there's a lot of reasons why people may be reluctant to talk about this subject. So it's really important, before you go in to have conversations about sleep, that you think about your own biases, because we all have them. And you were raised a certain way, you may have raised your own children a certain way, and you have certain beliefs about what is right and wrong for sleep. So what we want you to think about is how you handle this subject makes a big difference. So we want you to be sensitive to the fact that what you experienced as a parent or as a child may be different than the experiences that this parent or child has had, and we want to be sensitive to those differences, and respectful of that. The focus for the conversations we're going to talk about today are about policy and safety, and not about right and wrong, right? So we're going to move away from judgment, because a lot of people feel very judged about their sleep practices, and that can put folks on the defensive. So we're going to move away from judgment, move away from right and wrong, and really focus on being clear about what is policy and what is safest for their child. So in order to do that, what we feel like will be helpful throughout this webinar to give you those skill sets is we're going to make sure that we're really clear about what safe and unsafe sleep is, and that, those policies and practices, they're always being updated, and so we want to make sure you know what is current. We want to make sure you know how to assess when children are at risk for a fatality, and that's really the big topic here. Is we want people to understand that sleep-related death is something that we're trying to avoid. And we want you to be able to communicate those messages in a way that does all those things we just talked about, clearly, focusing on policy, and with respect. And we want you to know how to recognize and understand risk factors and address them when you see them. So I'm going to pass it over to Jessica, who's going to talk about, why safe sleep matters, and talk a little bit about policy in North Carolina.
Okay. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction to this topic. And you are so right about what a touchy subject this can be with the families we work with and even with our own families. In this room, we were having conversations prior to the webinar starting, and it can really challenge people's beliefs about what's best for them and their babies. But unfortunately, there's really just no way around it. Unsafe sleep for infants can and does result in infant deaths. So earlier this year, the Center for Disease Control reported that approximately 3,500 babies in the U.S. are lost to sleep-related deaths each year. Here in North Carolina, the largest category of deaths in child welfare cases involved unsafe sleep. In 2015-16, 152 fatalities were reported to the Division of Social Services. 47 of those deaths, or 31%, involved unsafe sleep environments. In 2016-17, 181 deaths were reported, and 48, that's 26%, involved unsafe sleep environments. I can tell you this kind of made me sick to my stomach when I heard that for the first time, but I wasn't necessarily surprised considering the experiences I've had in the field. And I'm willing to bet a lot of you are having a similar reaction to that. So while it appears that our field is confronting this issue at an alarming frequency, this is not just a child welfare issue. This is about public health and education. And the information you will hear during this presentation is consistent with statewide and national efforts to promote safe sleep. So as we discuss this topic, we have to ask the very scary question of, would these children still be alive if they were not exposed to unsafe sleep environments? These deaths are more preventable than homicides, suicides, and other types of fatalities. And child welfare workers are in a unique position to decrease these numbers through targeted education. We've talked about how challenging it can be to have these conversations with families, but the data regarding these fatalities paints a picture that's really hard to ignore. Over a 2-year period, 95 sleep-related deaths were reported to the division. That's equivalent to 4 kindergarten classrooms of children, and that doesn't even include the number of deaths that were not reported to the division. So of those deaths, 62 were co-sleeping with a parent or parents in an adult bed. 15 were co-sleeping with a parent on a sofa. 4 were co-sleeping twins with blankets or other objects in the crib. 10 were sleeping in swings or bouncy seats. And 4 were sleeping face down, propped up with bottles or on mattresses on the floor. So, excuse me again, I'm sorry. So as you recall, not every fatality necessitates a review, and the case has to meet certain criteria to receive one. But of the 95 sleep-related fatalities that the division received notification of in the past 2 years, 40 received intensive state child fatality reviews. So of those 40, 5 of the cases were open for CPS assessments, 11 were open for in-home services, 2 for foster care services. 22 had been closed, but the family had received services within 12 months prior to the death. And 14 were born having been prenatally exposed to substances, which we'll learn later can be indicative of a high-risk environment. So during these reviews, the fatality team learned some key information that child welfare professionals should keep in mind when working with families. So in most cases, a safe sleeping service was available, but it was unused. Most died in the same bed with parent or siblings. Some suffocated wedged between couch cushions or other surfaces. It was common for alcohol or drugs to be a factor. And parents had often been provided with safe sleep education from multiple sources, but it was unclear in most situations whether the parents were specifically told about the fatal risk of unsafe sleep conditions. So with this idea that child welfare staff have an opportunity to provide education and help mitigate risk, revised child welfare policy addresses the issue in multiple areas of the new manual. Before we start talking about the policy, I do want to acknowledge what most of you hopefully already know, which is that the new manual that was supposed to be effective on July 1 is delayed until September. I don't think this is going to have a major impact on any takeaways from this training, but I just wanted to acknowledge that since I'm sure some people are thinking about it. So with that elephant out of the way, we're going to look at the CPS assessment policy. The county child welfare worker must request a tour of the home in order to assess the family's living environment and how it impacts child safety and risk. This includes the entire home and property where the child resides. Specifically, the social worker must address infant safe sleep during the course of the home visit. In CPS in-home services, if an infant resides in the home, the county child welfare worker must specifically discuss safe sleeping and observe the sleeping arrangements. With the substance-affected infant policy, due to there being an increased risk associated with sleep-related infant deaths for this population, the social worker must encourage the family to arrange for safe and separate sleeping arrangements for the infant. And this discussion should be documented on the 5010, and when appropriate, a plan for arranging safe sleep can be addressed in the temporary parental safety agreement. So the link to the new policy manual is on the bottom of this slide, and we recommend that you read these sections. So additionally, with the policy rollout, there are several forms or tools that address safe sleep. So of course you have the 5010, which prompts the social worker to discuss safe sleeping arrangements with the family and to document any actions that are taken as a result of this conversation. There's the DSS 5203, the initial provider assessment, which is used to assess the home environment of potential placements. It prompts the social worker to assess the proposed sleeping arrangements for the child with consideration to the child's age. The North Carolina in-home contact record, which is required to be completed monthly, it prompts the social worker to observe and document sleeping arrangements in the home and to ensure that, if there are infants in the home, that safe sleeping arrangements are being used. And the North Carolina Permanency Planning Contact Record, it doesn't explicitly address infant safe sleep, but there is a section on safety and supervision in the placement, and that would be the appropriate place to document findings. And the link to these specific forms are at the bottom of this slide as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Molly Berkoff to talk about what safe sleep is and what we should be looking for.
Hey, Molly, real quick before we start, sorry, this is Laura, sorry to interrupt. We have a couple questions, Jessica, that are very specific to the statistics, so I just wanted to answer two of them. So one was the question around the age of children with these statistics. So they want to know if that means a year or younger than a year, or what are we talking about when we're talking about those fatality statistics? And the second question is when we're talking about drugs and alcohol being involved, is that with the parent, the child, or both? So we just wanted to answer those real quick.
Okay. So I did not collect these statistics. My assumption would be, based on previous conversations, is that babies would be a year or younger, but we can certainly get back to that, maybe in the FAQ. And in terms of the substance exposure, we're talking about prenatal substance exposure.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. All right, go ahead, Molly. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm a pediatrician, and I do counsel families in clinic about safe sleep, and we thought it would be helpful to make sure you all heard what we're professing or talking about in pediatrics clinic to make sure that you're continuing to give the same message to families that you're taking care of. So we want you all to follow the ABCs of safe sleep for children that are full-term or infants that are full-term, as well as those that are healthy. You can notice that the box on the bottom of this slide shows that medical providers may alter the following recommendations in special circumstances, such as in prematurity. But in general, the message that folks should be receiving from their pediatric provider is that infants should be placed alone, on their back, and in a crib. So for alone, we are up against significant competition with lots of different toys, blankets, and beautiful items that folks can put in their baby's sleeping environment. So you may be working with a family that has mobiles that they're hanging on the crib, or blankets, stuffed animals, and bumpers. But what we're advising in pediatric practice and the principles of safe sleep is that infants should be alone in their crib. So no pillows in their cribs, no loose blankets, no stuffed animals, and no bumper pads. So really just a mattress that's tight-fitting with a mattress cover over it in the crib. The reason why is because we know that soft objects can obstruct the nose and mouth of the infant and result in an unsafe sleeping environment and potentially a fatality. So it's not okay to have blankets, pillows, fluffy toys, or crib bumpers in a crib. It's also not okay to have a crib that's older, that's not been approved by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, that has missing hardware or missing crib slats. Cribs that are older than 10 years are not thought to be appropriate, and in-bed sleepers, so sleepers that are inside the bed with the parents, are not believed to be okay as well. It is okay to have cribs with snugly fitted mattresses or have bedside sleepers that have been approved by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So families may ask you, what do I do if my baby is cold since they're in this crib by themselves with a mattress and a tightly fitting mattress cover? So a good rule of thumb is that the room temperature should be comfortable for a lightly clothed adult and around 72 degrees. The infant should be dressed only in one layer more than what the adult would be necessarily comfortable wearing in that room. And only infant sleep clothing should be used, such as a wearable blanket. We're advising families to avoid overheating, as we know that's a risk for unsafe sleep and potentially a bad outcome. Some families may choose to swaddle their infants, and if they do decide to do this, we advise them to use a light blanket, but to not swaddle once the baby can roll, because they can get stuck on their bellies and not be able to roll back over. We advise families that if they do swaddle, to ensure that it's snug around the chest, but that there's room for the infant to move their hips and knees around. And a lot of families will notice that the nurse in the newborn nursery or in the hospital has swaddled their infant, so they may have questions about that. So on Instagram and Facebook and other social media, folks definitely post lots of pictures that are very adorable looking of young children and infants sleeping with siblings, sleeping with animals, and co-sleeping with their parents. So while this looks adorable in a photograph, we know that this is actually a very unsafe sleep environment and is dangerous. So I want to make sure that you all know that we're not just talking about sudden infant death syndrome and trying to reduce the risk of that, but there are accidental causes of infant death that can be prevented by having a safe sleep environment. So unfortunately, we know that some children will end up dying from suffocation when something such as a pillow or something covers the baby's face and nose that blocks the ability for the baby to breathe. I do inpatient consults at UNC hospitals, and we've definitely taken care of infants where the family didn't seem to have any risk factors but wasn't following safe sleep, and unfortunately had a child fatality because of unsafe sleep practices. Children can also have a negative outcome from entrapment, such as when a baby gets trapped between two objects like a mattress and a wall and can't breathe and can't make a noise to ensure their caregiver knows that they're in danger. Children can also die from strangulation, such as when something presses on or wraps around the baby's neck that blocks their airway. So this is a photograph that shows an unsafe sleep environment for a baby with their caregiver. This helps to illustrate the dangers of entrapment and suffocation. We advise families not to sleep with their infants and also not to place infants on couches or armchairs for them to go to sleep, because there is a risk of unsafe sleep leading to death in these situations. So we advise parents that they should not feed their baby on a couch or an armchair if there's a chance of falling asleep, to have somebody else in the room to help monitor to make sure that that doesn't happen, and to make sure the baby can be returned to a safe sleep environment after feeding. This is an ad campaign from another state, from Wisconsin, which basically was a campaign that state's public health agency took on to make sure families knew that babies should be sleeping alone. In this graphic, you can see that the headboard of the bed says, "For too many babies last year, this was their final resting place." We know that babies may be in a parent's bed for feeding or comforting, but we want to advise that babies should be returned to his or her own bed when the parent is ready to return to sleep and the baby's finished feeding. This is another campaign from Wisconsin that is definitely very dramatic, that shows that your baby sleeping with you can be just as dangerous, and this basically helps to, from this particular state, a shock factor to make sure people understood that this was an unsafe sleep practice and would help get people talking about what a safe sleep practice should be for these infants. So you can see they're on a blanket. It looks like potentially there's a pillow around them. There's too many objects around these babies to make it be a safe sleep environment. Another recommendation is that infants should be in the room with the caregiver, but in their own bed. And this is an illustration to show the mom and the dad in one bed and the baby being in the same room, but being in their own sleep environment. So for back, the recommendation is that every baby should be placed back to sleep. Every sleep by every caregiver for the first year of life. So not just giving guidance to the parents if you're involved with extended relatives in a case for in-home services or for an assessment, to be able to say to grandmother, to aunts, uncles, siblings that if you're taking care of this infant or young child, this infant should be placed back to sleep. We know that back is best. We know this from lots of research that's been conducted. We're aware that stomach sleeping increases the risk of sudden infant death syndrome, and we also know that sleeping on the back carries the lowest risk of sudden infant death syndrome. And that's why we're recommending in pediatrics and in public health that back to sleep is best. The reason why stomach sleeping is dangerous is that it can increase the rebreathing of carbon dioxide for that baby and lead them to stop breathing or having an apneic event. We also know that sleeping on your stomach decreases the efficiency of heat loss, and so infants are at higher risk for overheating. It also decreases their risk of waking up or arousal. I know from practicing that a lot of caregivers, when I advise them to have their infant sleep on their back, do get very worried about choking or spitting up. We do know that there is no increased risk of choking or difficulties for that infant breathing if they're placed on their back to sleep. So when babies sleep on their stomach, milk can pool in their throat and actually cause them to have negative consequences from that. Having a baby go to sleep on their back shows that they're less likely to choke. So we help to encourage families to dispel that myth and make sure they're aware that sleeping on your back actually is safer, even if a baby was to spit up. Positioning devices are also frequent questions that families may ask about whether they should use them with their infants. No position devices have been approved, so you can see there are 3 photographs in this slide that show different positions that an infant is on their, at least 2 of them on their back, and these devices help to keep them that way, but we do not advise using that, and that is not something that is advised by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And certainly the infant on the rightmost part of the slide, who is face down, would be considered in an extremely unsafe sleep environment. Families will ask about the development of flat spots on the back of the baby's head because they're spending time on their back in infancy, and we counsel families that you should be using what's called tummy time during the day when the infant is awake to help them with less kind of contact on the back of their head, but also that this should resolve as the baby starts to roll and starts to become more mobile. So again, we advise families to use tummy time because it helps to reduce flat spots on the back of the head. And this is time when a caregiver is actively engaged with the infant and has them on their belly when they're awake. It also helps to change the direction a baby is sleeping in to reduce flat spots. So if there's a fan in the room or something on the ceiling that the child's looking at, you can certainly position the baby on the other side of the crib in order to have them look in a different direction. We know that flat spots usually resolve in a few months and after a baby learns to sit up. And bald spots, we usually tell families that a bald spot on the back of a baby's head is a sign of a healthy baby and a sign as a pediatrician that we know that families are using back to sleep as a method to help keep their baby safe. Once an infant can roll from back to front and front to back, the infant can be allowed to remain in their sleep position that they assume on their own. So while the caregiver is placing the baby on their back to sleep in their crib, if they're able to roll and they find them on their belly when they go to get them to feed them, that's okay for them to have been in that position as long as they were able to get in that position on their own. So a few slides about the infant's crib, and some of this is a little bit repetitive, but we wanted to go over it again. The baby should be put to sleep in a separate sleep environment, so in a crib or a pack and play, that has a firm mattress which is covered by a fitted sheet. And again, there's no objects, no bumpers, no stuffed animals, pillows in those sleep environments. Again, the baby should be in, what's recommended currently is that the baby should be in the parent's room, but in a separate sleep environment that's specific for their safety. Families will ask about swings and bouncy seats. Currently, the American Academy of Pediatrics does not recommend and does not advise having infants sleep in a swing or a bouncy seat. If they do fall asleep in one, they should be removed and placed in their bed as soon as it is practical. Now, there may be some advice given by their community provider or family practice provider, and so if you feel the family is getting different advice from them, it would be wise and helpful to talk directly to that provider to understand what their recommendations are. And other things that can protect babies from sleep-related death are pacifiers. So you can see on the picture on the left with that blue plastic pacifier, that's the kind of pacifier we're talking about, not ones that have additional objects or strings or stuffed animals attached to them. Breastfeeding is also thought to be protective, and immunizations as well. So we're going to administer, I think, 3 different slides that have some questions for you all about what is unsafe in these pictures. And there will be a poll that shows up for you to answer. And I'll give you a few minutes once I show you the photograph to provide the poll responses. So in this particular slide, if you all could take a minute and look at it carefully and see what concerns you. And then answer the poll. It looks like most of you all have provided responses, and it appears that the majority of you are saying that there is about 4 different unsafe sleep items here. And I'll go through from those of us that put the presentation together, what we identified as being unsafe sleep items here. One is that the baby is face down on their caregiver and that they are stomach sleeping, that they're co-sleeping with an adult, so they should be by themselves, that they're sleeping on a couch, that there's a soft blanket there that's over them, and that there's a kind of a propper or a bumper that's behind the, looks like the dad or the caregiver and the baby. So those would all be considered unsafe. Thank you. If you all could take a minute and address what concerns you in this photograph, and then I can go over what we're able to see from our end. And it looks like the majority of you are responding. I think this is a little bit hard to see in how you categorize how many things, because some of them probably fall into different groups. But this crib is, which you may not, or may not know, is older than 10 years. One of the items that you can identify as being a risk factor for this infant is the spacing of the crib slats. The stuffed animals in the crib would not be considered a safe sleep environment, and there's lots of objects in this crib, clothing, blankets. The mattress cover is not firmly attached and is hanging out, so multiple items. So most of you answered that there's 5 items in here that concern you. We had 3 different groupings, but it seems like you're picking up on the things that are concerning in that photograph. And this is the last one to identify what concerns you in this photograph. I'll give you guys a minute to answer. And from our end, it looks like the poll is coming up pretty consistently. But the things that we identified in this photograph where the baby is face down or kind of squished up against that bumper, they are sleeping on their belly or their side and not their back. That there's also a blanket, that pink item with the polka dots on it in there as well as the bumper. And so those would be the very concerning items that you'd have a family take out and to change the sleeping position of the infant. And I think we had a minute for questions.
Yep. So I'm going to field a few questions that are really specific to Molly's content. I'm going to hold a few for the end. So let's see. You did discuss pack and plays, but someone had a question about something that is called a rock and play, which I'm not sure what that is, but they wanted to know if that falls into the same category.
So I would say two things. One is that the recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics is that the child is in the pack and play or in a crib with a fitted mattress. So I would imagine a rock and play is not that type of an item. So it wouldn't be considered an approved item for a safe sleep environment. If the baby falls asleep in that type of thing, that's fine as long as the caregiver is able to take them out and place them in their safe sleep environment once they are sleeping. There are websites that are on those handouts that are underneath our photographs on the left-hand side of the screen that you can download, and that has information about what is and isn't approved. Also, the link for the Consumer Product Safety Commission about different types of cribs and pack and plays that are approved for safe sleep.
Okay, so next one, and I know you mentioned this in the content, was about if a baby's rolling over on its own. Is there, does that increase the risk for SIDS? So maybe you can just give a little bit more information about why we don't need to worry about that once they're doing that on their own.
So a baby's able to move and get out of danger once they're able to roll on their own, which would be around 4 to 6 months of age. And so the recommendation is to make them to have them go to sleep on their backs prior to that mobility. However, it is still recommended to have them be placed on their back to go to sleep once they are able to roll, but to allow the baby be able to move around on their own would be fine. And at that time, you also want to make sure you're not swaddling the infant because you want them to be able to move on their own freely and not get trapped.
Okay, and then we have a question about the car seat and a swing bouncy seat, and they're asking if the baby falls asleep in that, can they remain?
The recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics is that they're not supposed to sleep, and we would say that in clinic as well, that we do not approve sleeping in those objects once they fall asleep, but to have them be moved into their bed or crib to be at that point in time to make sure they're in a safe sleep environment.
Okay, and then the last question in this is, and I wouldn't necessarily have you talk about this specific case, but they're just talking about if a child has medical issues and there are specific recommendations from that doctor that may or may not coincide with the safe sleep recommendations. How do they handle that?
I think it's important to go directly to that provider to talk to them about the concerns and potentially the difference in what's being recommended for safe sleep practice, to understand the medical issues or issues related to prematurity for that infant, for why they are being advised to have a different sleep environment. And instead of having that just come from the family, to be able to have direct communication with that provider in case there's a different explanation or set of circumstances that they would need to clarify.
All right, great. And there are a few more questions, but they're more about policy and assessment, so I'm going to hang on to those until the end of our presentation. Thank you so much, Molly, for answering those questions. We had some great ones. And we're going to pass it on to Tonya, who's going to talk about risk assessment.
Thank you. So let's talk about assessing risk and talking with families. North Carolina's effort to promote safe sleep includes baby sleep programs like the Sleep Box. You have safe sleep guidelines and information about period of purple crying. Some counties are starting a baby sleep box program, and that box is a sturdy box that's placed in the bed that the baby sleeps in. The box comes filled with baby supplies, and the parent has to complete some education in order to receive the box. This may or may not be available in your county, so what you want to do is check with your local hospitals to find out if this program is available. It is also important to know where you can get safe sleep devices for your families who don't have them. So in your handouts on page 4 is a list of baby sleep box websites and resources for families. Cone Health, which is a women's hospital in Greensboro, you can receive a starter kit that includes a baby box. The boxes are provided by Family Support Network of Central North Carolina, and they were selected by Baby Box University to distribute the kits for free. There's also another company called the Baby Box Company, and they provide a free box. You'll have to complete your community's online course at the Baby Box Universities first. And if their baby boxes aren't available for free, then you can also purchase one. So even if there isn't an active free box program in your area, you can buy the box. You can even still access the educational content that they offer on their website. Another resource is Babies Need Boxes, and this is nonprofit, which provides the life-saving finished baby box tradition to families around the globe. And then you can sign up and register, and you can even start a chapter in your area and offer that to your families. Baby Box University is part of the Baby Box company, where you will receive a free box. You must register. Then once you register, you will locate that particular course. You will watch all the videos in that course. It's a series of short videos. Some are under a minute, some are 2 minutes. Once you complete that, then you will take a quiz, and then you will contact the person that's closest to your area to receive your box. The second statewide prevention effort includes the safe sleep guidelines we just reviewed. It's important to remember this effort is supported by many different agencies, not just child welfare. It can be helpful to contact your hospitals and public health departments to find out what information they are providing to new parents to ensure we are delivering the same message. And they may also have some helpful resources to use with your families during some of your home visits. The third effort to promote safe sleep is to educate parents about the period of purple crying. This is a time when an infant is more likely to cry and have difficulties getting sleep. Caregivers are often frustrated and tired during this period, which can make it even harder to maintain safe sleep practices. Oftentimes, parents are desperate for any sleep they can get. They may overlook what is seen as normal behavior and can become overwhelmed and frustrated. So let's take a look at what purple crying is. It's also located page 3 in your handout. So the P is for peak of crying. Your baby may cry more each week, the most in month 2, then less in months 3 and 5. U is unexpected. That's where there's crying that comes and goes, and the parent doesn't know why. Resist to soothing. Your baby may not stop crying no matter what you try. If you change the diaper, they're still crying. You feed them, you hold them, they can still cry during this time. Pain-like face. A crying baby may look like they're in pain when they're crying, but they're actually not. Long-lasting is crying that lasts as much as 5 hours a day or more. In an evening, your baby may cry more in the late afternoon or evening. This begins at about 2 weeks of age and can last up to 5 months. It is best described to a point in the baby's life where they cry more than any other time. It's important for parents to know that all babies go through this period. Some cry more while others cry less. This can also be heightened if the baby is substance affected. Therefore, it's important to educate families about purple crying because it can help them better manage this challenging time and to make plans for additional support to ensure that safe sleep practices are maintained even when the caregivers are frustrated and tired. So now we're going to take a look at some safe sleep risk factors in child welfare. These are potential red flags. Doesn't mean that it's a major issue, but red flags tells you I need to ask additional questions and I need to assess a little bit more. So the first one, in multiple families temporarily sharing living space, what you want to look for is, do they have enough space to accommodate sleep arrangements for their children during this time? Lack of beds for children. You're having discussions with families about where everyone is sleeping. Is this creating a risk? Is this creating a safety issue? Children born testing positive for drugs, substance-affected infants are strongly encouraged to have separate sleeping arrangements because they are at greater risk. Transient families, you're assessing their lack of stability and shelter and how that can impact safe sleep practices. Parents have untreated mental health conditions. You're assessing what those mental health conditions are. Is there a history of depression? Are there delusional thoughts and hallucinations? Is it anything that will inhibit the parent's ability to meet the basic needs and or accurately address well-being needs of the child? So like I said, these are risk and red flags for you to ask those additional questions and dig a little bit more. Some questions you need to be asking regarding safe sleep. Where does the child nap? Where do they sleep at night? Children should never be put down for a nap in an adult bed, as we already discussed, due to heavy bedding, suffocation risk on pillow top mattresses. Have you ever fallen asleep with the child in your arms on the bed or on the couch? Parents should be educated on never sleeping with their child in the bed, sofa, etc., due to risk of accidental overlay, wedging, Also, twins at this age should not share a bed. What kind of bedding do they use? Cribs should not have bulky items or too much bedding. And then where do the siblings sleep? If the parent has multiple small children, as we previously discussed, what are the sleeping arrangements for each child? Are they safe? Are there any risks? And do you have any medical conditions or other reasons you might be impaired to respond to be aware of your child when they're asleep? A lot of over-the-counter medications can cause extreme drowsiness. Some prescriptions can, so you are assessing anything that can impair a parent's ability to act and respond to their child's need. Another question you can have is, have the parent received the DVD or booklet and or education of the period of purple crying? If they have, you can have that conversation and then talk about what questions do they have. What do they feel about the video? How are they handling the baby in their home during this time? So these questions should allow for follow-up questions to assess family protective capacities and or awareness of safe sleep. You can ask scaling questions and exception questions to obtain a greater understanding of the parent's position. An example of a scaling question regarding safe sleep practice and or awareness could be on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being safe sleep. What's safe sleep? 10 being I always practice safe sleep guidelines. The parent can tell you what number they are. Your next question should be, what makes you that number? That'll let you know the parent's position, how they view that practice. And then your next question should be, what would get you to the next number? An example of an exception question, when parents admit that they are not always following safe sleep guidelines, you can ask, are there times when they do follow them and place the baby on its back? Then what is different about that time? And how did that compare to the other times you didn't? This allows parents to see the differences of the potential risk of not practicing safe sleep. Or if there's no different, then you can have conversations about, well, won't we just follow those safe sleep guidelines if there's not a major difference? Like Jessica said earlier, you want to make sure you're documenting that information on your DSS 5010, especially if it's substance-affected infant, and putting it on a TPSA as needed. Some observations you need to be aware of: parent and child interactions during nurturing, feeding, and providing care. This allows you time to educate as well as provide additional assistance and questions. If the infant have health issues like reflux, breathing problems, heart murmurs, etc., how are the parents handling that situation? Have you observed those actual sleep arrangements where everyone is sleeping? Are there structural issues in the household? Are there allergens, environmental issues, anything in the home that can add additional stress to that infant? And then the structure and suitability of the sleeping area and device. You want to make sure that you're following the current safety regulations. And how parent places the child in the crib. Have you actually observed them do so? And then where's the location of an emergency contact list? Emergencies can come up at any time in the middle of the night. You want to make sure they have all the necessary resources and tools to assist them. Sometimes families just push back. We can be used to doing things our own way. If you have history, I've done this way and there's never been any problems. So how are you handling families that push back? So some common questions that can come up: why should I listen to you? You don't have children. You want to shift that focus off of you and put it back on the parent. A potential response could be, you have the best insight of your baby and your family than I do. While I'm learning about you and your family, my focus is to partner with you, discuss universal expectations for safe sleep, and state policy that will help keep your precious child safe. My parents did everything you say not to, and my siblings and I still survived just fine. And you can just say, a lot of times, as we adapt in the world, we change based off of past experiences. So safety of children is no different. Safety precautions have changed over the years based on what we learn that keeps the children safer. So part of your role is to work in partnership with them to share those changes, discuss why they're important, and work together to implement them to make sure their baby is safe. But I'll never be able to get any sleep if I follow your recommendations. And you can just acknowledge getting sleep is crucial at this time, not for you, but for your baby. You want to be your best self to meet the demanded needs of your child. Changing things that may be working for you might be very uneasy, especially if it involves getting sleep when it seems you are not sleeping at all. And you can add, it's also just as important, if not vital, to make sure that while you're getting sleep, you are taking the necessary measures or steps to keep your baby as safe as possible. You are making such a big deal of this issue. It's not that serious. Well, the reason we focus on this topic so much is that safe sleep strategies can save children's lives. Suffocation is one of the most common causes of infant death. We want to make sure we know everything to provide to you in order to prevent such a tragic outcome. I can tell you love your child deeply, so let's work together to give you and your baby the best outcome. So those are just some potential things that you can talk with parents about if they're giving you pushback. This also applies to foster parents as well as your kinship caregivers. You will need to educate and assess safe sleep with them as well. If a child stays with a grandparent during nap time, they also need to be aware of and use safe sleep practices. Often it is grandparents or kinship care providers who struggle with the safe sleep guidelines because they have changed over time and they may feel they are being judged about the sleep practices they used in the past. Remember to use the guidelines we discussed to address challenges and be aware that older caregivers may need just a little bit more support. You can utilize in your handouts to assist your families. You can do purple crying on page 3 with your foster parents as well as your kin providers. You can go over safe sleep for your baby, which is page 5. And then what does a safe sleep environment look like on page 6. You can actually take that out with you on your home visits and have those discussions with your family. Those 2 pages also have Spanish versions, and that's on page 7 and 8. Some additional resources to assist you with assessing your family's safe sleep: nc.org, American Academy of Pediatrics Safe Sleep Campaign, Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, March of Dimes, Safe Sleep for Your Baby. And there is another one, www.mombaby.org/safe-sleep is another resource for you to use with your families. The main thing here is you are assessing safety and risk. What are the safety issues? What are the potential risks? Having conversations with your families. If they're resistant, then you need to have conversation about what is causing you to be resistant. What is it about the information that I'm providing to you that's causing you to say, yeah, I don't know about that one. Got to have real conversations with them and tell them the end result for everyone is to have their baby safe.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions, so there's been a few that have been asked more than once, so I'm going to try to get to those first. Some of these are for Tonya. I'll do those first, and then there's a few I think that are more policy related that I'm going to have Jessica answer. So let's see. So a couple people have asked, when you have a substance-affected infant or any situation where you've given those guidelines and they refuse, what is the option then at that point? They refuse to follow those guidelines.
I would want to know, why are they refusing? What is stopping them from following through with whatever the issue is? And then once you get that answer, it might be that they're scared. It might be that they're just not in agreement to what you're saying. Having those additional conversations and then consulting with your management team to see what your next steps are going to be if it's creating a safety and risk.
Okay, great. All right, the next one is, should we be addressing safe sleeping when it is a substance-exposed infant on the TPSA every time we have a case like this? You want Jessica to answer that one? Sorry, hold on.
Oh, sorry, I need to unmute myself. So policy is going to give you, policy does give you the bare minimum, right? It says that you need to, and this is for every situation, you need to assess it and the safe sleeping environment, and you need to address it with the family. And then using the information that you learned today to educate and empower them to make good choices is just good social work. So when you're talking about anything beyond that and talking about the TPSA, you really need to make your determination based on a totality of the circumstances. So if there are additional risk factors like substance use in the home, that could be a reason to document it or to put a plan in place on the TPSA. I would be hesitant to say every time because, again, you need to assess that risk. But if you have a parent that's actively using, then, you do have a big risk factor there, and it probably would be appropriate to put that on the TPSA. But I couldn't say across the board that you should do that, no.
All right. Actually, while you're answering, there was one more I was going to pose to you, Jessica, which was about foster care. So this actually came up when you were talking about what's in the policy manual. So the question was no recommendation in foster care. So do we talk with foster relative placements about this?
Mm-hmm. And I would say, the tools and instruments that we have to assess foster care homes, no, they do not explicitly address infant safe sleep, but you do explicitly address safety and supervision in placement, and this, if you have an infant, this ties in directly to that.
Okay, and then there's a question about the age that we're talking about because we were using the word child a lot. So when we're talking about safe sleep, what age are we specifically referring to? Molly, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So we're talking about infants up to 1 year of age.
So all those safe sleep policies that Jessica's referring to, and that the recommendations of assessment for risk are referring to children under 1 year of age. All right. Okay, I think, let me just see, we're almost out of time. We have a few other questions which we will answer in the frequently asked questions document. The resource that Tonya mentioned, John put in the chat pod, it'll also be on the frequently asked questions document as well. So if you need to get that resource, that will be available for you. We definitely had questions about resources, so just to remind you that there's a lot of ideas and information for you on the handout, so make sure you have you've downloaded those handouts and have them available to you. We also had a question about whether or not you will have access to these slides to use for in-house training. And there are a lot of images on this presentation that have copyright problems and that we cannot share them out. So we're going to make a version of this PowerPoint that removes our copyrighted images. And if you want to get a copy of that, you can contact our registrar, Vicki, and she'll get in touch with us, and we will get you a copy of the presentation that you are able to use within your agency. All right, so just to wrap up, if you can type into the chat pod one thing that you've learned that you'll do in response to what you've learned today, just one thing you think you're going to do differently. We'll take a look and see what some of those things are. And while you're all typing that, there we go. Okay, we've got, so going over the ABCs with new parents. Check to make sure, to visually see what's in the environment. Ensure that all aunts, uncles, and grandparents. No crib bumpers. Purple crying. Lots of people talking about the ABCs. Great. Baby box. Yep, but really look into those baby box resources. Excellent. So it sounds like you all have taken some good information away from today, so we're glad that you'll be able to use this information right away. Here's the contact information for our 3 presenters. So if there are specific things that you would like to talk with them about, their emails are listed here on the slide.